All right, looks like we got a good crowd today.
Oh, great. Amazing.
All right, so thanks everyone for joining us. This is, of course, this month's free webinar courtesy of Canadian Musician Magazine and NWC. I am Mike Raine, editor-in-chief of Canadian Musician Magazine, and I'm really privileged to have with me today two outstanding guests to talk about our topic, which I probably should have mentioned off the bat. Title today is What Artists Need to Know About Music Media. We'll be talking about things like how to form a pitch for an interview or an article yourself for media, how to give a good interview, and just some of the behind the scenes about how music media works, how publicists work. And so yeah, with me today, like I said, two outstanding guests. First up, Karen Bliss. Karen is, well, easily one of the best music journalists in Canada. She's been the Canadian correspondent for Billboard magazine for over a decade. She's been a freelance music journalist since her teens. Her work has appeared in all the magazines that we've all read, probably Rolling Stone, Polestar, Melody Maker, NME, Time, dozens more. The list of folks that she has interviewed is envious. Kurt Cobain, Eminem, Eddie Vedder, Lauryn Hill, Robert Plant and Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, Justin Timberlake, Beyonce, and on and on. She's also founder of the music-heavy, charity-focused online magazine, SamaritanMag.com. She has co-authored a book called Music from Far and Wide, celebrating 40 years of the Juno Awards. And I could keep going about Karen's resume. At some point, I got to actually ask her a question, though. So I'll also introduce our other guest, the wonderful Tiffany Astle. Tiffany is the founder of Penelope PR. She leads some of the biggest campaigns in entertainment in Canada for the likes of the Canadian Country Music Association and Canadian Country Music Awards. She works with clients like USS, Virginia to Vegas, Mackenzie Porter, Lindsay L., Dean Brody, Coulter Wall, the Rec Laws, and on and on. So we have the journalist side, the music journalist side, and the PR side of things. So Karen, Tiffany, are you with me? And thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I feel so privileged. Karen is like, as I started working PR, it was just, I feel so honored to be on a panel with Karen Bliss. Like, it is a very high honor. So yeah, I'm very excited.
That's what happens when you're old.
No, that is not true. But yeah, I feel like Karen and I, when I first started in PR, I worked with Karen because she used to draft all the bios for the Juno Awards for us. So way back, playback. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a pretty broad topic today. I'm trying to kind of figure out the best way into this, but I'm going to start with kind of something that I've often felt and only sometimes said, but I often feel this when getting many, many emails every week from independent artists, which is to say, and I want to get your guys' perspective on this, that's to say that if there's one lesson that I kind of want artists to understand coming out of this, it's the fact that if you have an album or a new song coming out, that is not newsworthy. I know I'm sorry that it's a little bit of a harsh way to start things off, but it's really a key thing that I want to lay out there and kind of get folks lessons on so that they can then progress forward in a more productive fashion. But Tiffany, from your, I guess, publicist perspective, obviously, in terms of being the one meeting an artist, learning about a project, figure out what's the news hook here, what's the interesting story here to then bring to media. And Karen, as the person like myself, receiving all these pitches and all these emails, both from artists and publicists. When I say that, the fact that an artist, unless you are the Taylor Swifts of the world or whatever, that's bringing some massive built-in fan base, but for your average artist out there, what do you think when I say, if you have new music this week, that's not newsworthy?
From a PR perspective, I know maybe we'll dive into this later, but generally for our office anyway, obviously I can only speak from the Penelope PR front because that is, what I do and have been doing for the last 11 years here at Penelope PR. But we definitely don't ever work with someone just whose only plan is to put out new music. Like, that is generally not something that ends up being a campaign that we feel we can support adequately, especially with the massive continual change in the media market in Canada and everywhere globally. But as you said, I mean, and Michael, I think you've sent that very actual email to me saying, yeah, no music, no big deal. Like, what else is happening? And so from my perspective, on the PR side, we definitely work to build a story. And truthfully, from our perspective, we start working with a new client months in advance of anything new music coming, for the time to build that story or understand and get to know them as a person, looking at things that might allow us to create a story around the song or around the project that will provide us with better tools to pitch the right people to get the coverage that could be helpful. So I agree with your statement, all that to say.
And Karen, being the one receiving all these emails like myself.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting because it's not that it's not a story if you have a new release coming out, because sometimes, and with my editors, if something has been out for a considerable amount of time, then it's definitely not a story. So at least there's a little bit of a story if something, is coming out in the next, few weeks or month. Primarily, the music has to be good. But it doesn't necessarily have to be good if you have a cool story, whatever that might be. Maybe you recorded a whole album in Nunavut in their one and only studio. Maybe you wrote a song while you were, climbing Mount Everest. Like maybe there's, a charity associated with it. So for me, having SamaritanMag.com, that would always be a story, unless the song sucks. That's a whole other issue. And sometimes that's not subjective. Sometimes it really might suck. But yeah, you're competing with hundreds and thousands of releases, unfortunately, and there's not a lot of space. And sometimes it's a budget thing. Sometimes there's no's, especially in my case. I get a lot of no's from editors because they simply don't have the budget that month.
And I think what you're saying is getting at the point that I really mean when I say the fact that you have new music is not newsworthy. And essentially what I'm saying is like, the music it's an entry point into a story, but what we're really looking for is what's the story behind the music. All right, you have new music. Where's the story? What's the story of the music? What's the story of the artist that makes it interesting once the person goes, there's a new album.
Right. But I don't want someone necessarily telling me that. Like sometimes I get these weird pitches and the publicist will say like, oh, you can talk to this person about this, or this is an angle, or this is an angle, this is an angle. And that kind of just pisses me off. I barely even read them. And sometimes a story reveals itself when you speak to the person. Like they might not even know they have a story, and you might seize on something that's interesting to you in that interview and pursue that. So, I might have the basics, which are sometimes hard even to get these days from publicists. And then it's up to me to draw a story out of the person.
And I'm just going to interject for one thing, just to add in something I should have just told the folks listening in the intro, which is that there will be a 10 or 15 minutes Q&A at the end around 1:45. So we're going to be pulling the questions out of the chat. If you have a question for Karen or Tiffany, put it in the chat, label it, start big bold type question, write your question. My colleague Andrew will be monitoring the chat and sending those to me to ask to pass on to Tiffany and Karen at the end. Anyways, forgot to say that, just wanted to add that in. But yeah, Tiffany, you mentioned before an album comes out, you're working with an artist, weeks or months in advance to kind of formulate what the strategy will be, what the pitch will be, what the story is, like we've been saying. What are those initial conversations you're having with an artist about a new project?
Sure. Yeah. For us, I would say, we are very much focused, and I have been, I worked other places before Penelope PR, and the focus for me has always been on the actual human. I could not agree more with Karen that it's like always about the music. So at Penelope PR, we have a rule that a new client has to have one of two things, and hopefully both. And the first thing is music that we love. We have to love the music, or we need to love the person, and really believe that they deserve to have a team that works as hard as they do. And hopefully most of the time, I would say 97% of the time, it's both of those things together. But the example I use is, when I worked the Canadian tenors, now the tenors, I'm not an opera fan, but those men work so hard that they deserve to have someone who wanted to work as hard as they did on the PR front that they did on the music front. And we achieved great things together. So for us, it comes down to those two things. And then once someone's in and on board and has joined the family, we're very fortunate that I would say all of the clients we've almost had since the beginning. So we've worked with bands, USS you mentioned is a great example. From day one of PR, I've been with them, and we're doing our final farewell tour later this fall. It's just getting to actually know the people, because as Karen said, you learn as you go. So I will be listening in. For example, Michael, when you spoke to USS, I listened in and I learned things that I didn't know about the band. And so it is just that time that you spend getting to know someone, because also, as Karen said, people might not even know it's an interesting fact that they're saying, or they don't even know those things. And if you're simply rushing to get a PR person to put a press release together about a single or an album coming out, there's no time to actually build that relationship and get to know each other and understand what opportunities there might be, or how you might, as an artist, might want to talk about yourself. And, there's lots of things to kind of unravel there before, at least from Penelope PR's perspective, before we feel comfortable getting, a whole plan together of how you're going to promote an album, a single, a whole campaign for the next 6 months. We really like to have insight into that and like how those decisions were made, what values are and all that kind of stuff. We really like to understand that before we say, oh, there's just a song coming out. So for us, those are what those initial conversations are. And as cheesy as it sounds, we also are very much, are they going to fit with the family that we've built for ourselves? So all of our clients, and if you look back on any Penelope PR anything, you will notice that there is so much synergy between all of our pieces. So our content creators that we work, they generally do things with the artists that we work, to work together. We worked with Children's Hospital, and our like, we always just try to find things that like work together and can support each other. So that's also a huge part for us as well. It's not the same everywhere, but for us, that's also a key factor as well.
Interesting. Karen, you had said something in your previous answer that I found interesting, because it's kind of different than how I've often felt when you say, whether it's a publicist or an artist being like, hey, here's some interesting talking points about me and things I can speak about. And your perspective is kind of like, I'm the journalist here. I'll kind of decide what we talk about. And
like that.
And I've often had like, I may or may not use those things, but I've often found them helpful in a pitch to be like, all right, well, those are topics that match our audience and would be of interest to our audience.
Yeah, I mean, these are actual angles that it's yeah, I don't get it a lot. For me, I want from a publicist, and I rarely ever get it these days compared to when I started, I want liner notes. I want lyrics and liner notes, because that is how I've always done research. I read the lyrics, I check out what studio they recorded, who the guests were, who the engineers were, who they're thanking, because then I know that basic information. I don't have to ask it. And maybe there's something within there that I know from other, experiences that I can then ask them about. It is so difficult to get liner notes these days. I almost never get it. It's ridiculous, because I don't want to be asking someone like, who co-wrote a song and who the guests are, and like, oh, you're in, Alaska, or so that's pretty amazing to me. Like if publicists and the artists want you to do a great interview, they should be providing that information.
Interesting. Tiffany, in terms of like the ratio of success, I guess I want to kind of put some of this in perspective for artists, because you're going to get a lot of no's. Probably the majority of the response you will get will be a no. So to
If
put
any
things
response at all.
Yeah,
I'd say,
yeah,
like, if you get
totally.
a no, you're lucky. Like, let's be honest with
Yeah.
ourselves here. Yeah.
And I apologize for those times I haven't replied. You've probably caught me on a day where I've got
Yeah, no
well,
worries.
most days I'm very busy, but on a
Yeah.
day where I've got a lot of pitches that are just like,
Yeah.
anyways. But yeah, that put things in perspective. Like, what is a successful ratio of yeses to nos for you when putting out pitches for a new project?
I mean, I think that's really hard because in the end, it depends on the story. Like a perfect example is, you know, 2 years ago, we launched a campaign with an artist who had never done anything ever. Like it was her first project, first single, first everything. But she had written an album all about her struggles with mental health, and she had renamed country Conscious Country. And the response was incredible. Like she got E-Talk, ET Canada, like national coverage for an artist that literally had never put out a song before. That's almost unheard of in like PR world. That doesn't happen, you know? And truthfully, we pitched a whole bunch and got a lot of responses. But we totally recognize that that's because she had spent time creating this whole project and this message that she wanted to have come through, right? Whereas a perfect example is I have following this, I have a full press afternoon, and then I have a full press day on Monday and Tuesday. And to fill 3 hours, I have probably pitched, like nationally, but I've probably pitched 200 people, right? And still at this time, and that's basically, if you think about it, that's basically 4 interviews a day. So 12 interviews, right, at 15 minutes each. And I still have 1 spot left for Tuesday. So, and that's for an artist who was, you know, just announced as a host of a big TV show, who will be announced tomorrow as a performer for another one. Like there's lots of stuff going on around this artist. And still, because of the changing media landscape and availabilities and the experience I'm getting and response we're getting in the sense of wanting to cover local versus not local, you know, there are challenges there. So I would say do not get, you know, disappointed, or, you know, don't make you stop pitching. But you are, based on my experience, you are right in the sense of, like, I would say probably, you know, you won't get a response from like 80% of the messages you send out. And then the responses that you do get, like, I would say, like, I don't know, 7% are yeses and the rest of them are nos. But that percentage will go up, you know, based on pitching the right people. So like if I wanted Karen to write something in Samaritan magazine, but write to her with no charitable, like literally there's nothing that they're doing ever to help any person in the world ever. Like Karen's going to say, Tiffany, you're delusional. And why would I put this in my charity focused magazine? Right. So
also,
do your research. Yeah.
You're right. You have to know who you're pitching and be realistic, because when I started, I had like indie columns. I had like a local radio show. I could pretty much interview anyone and everyone. Being the Canadian correspondent for Billboard, A, it's a trade. B, it's American. Like I actually get pitches from publicists that say, you know, can you interview so-and-so for Billboard Canada? There is no such thing as Billboard Canada. But as a Canadian correspondent, most of our artists are not known in America. And even the ones that do have a profile and can tour there, they're not big enough. Like you can imagine, like Billboard's getting pitched on, you know, thousands of artists. Of course, if it's The Weeknd and Drake, that's a different story. But, you know, I wish I could write about all our amazing Canadian talent. I just can't, you know, and it's the same with industry stories. Like local stories are not news. The Canadian Country Music Awards are not news for Billboard. It's just not. We're in Canada. Most of our country artists aren't even known there. So yeah, you have to be realistic on who you're pitching. But something you said about the artist that has the mental health focus for her album, you know, that's obviously a very important hot topic. Black Lives Matter, Indigenous rights. I just got a press release, and in the headline, it said queer pop artist. And in my head, I just started thinking, I wonder when we're going to stop doing that. Like,
Mhm.
I do not care who an artist is having sex with in order to like their music. But obviously, we have to get the balance right now. So those qualifiers, let's say, are very important, because we have to, start writing about other artists and not just white males
Mhm.
or white females.
Yeah. There's a point in there about pitching right, making the right pitch to the right person, which is another of the really key things that I always want to drive home in these types of conversations. Because, speaking from, you spoke about having to know what you write for in Billboard and what that is and what works for Billboard. For Canadian Musician, it's a very different thing, being also pretty much a trade magazine too, a magazine for musicians and for the industry, not for average music fans. I get loads of pitches every week for people asking for a song or album or concert review. We don't do those things, because those are things you do if you're speaking to fans. You don't do reviews for other musicians in industry. So pretty much as soon as I see that, I delete, because they don't know who they're pitching to, essentially. So and Tiffany, I think, you've done this before too, where you'll send out kind of the email that goes out to everyone, but then you'll kind of circle back and say, hey, I want to return to this artist for you, and here's why they're a good fit for Canadian Musician, and here's what they could talk about for other musicians in industry and that kind of stuff. So when it comes to whether, I often say it's better to have 10 really good targeted pitches that are tailored to that person or that outlet than 100 generic pitches. But as a publicist, you probably have a much more informed thought on this. Like, what's your idea in that regard?
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Especially, again, I think I'm going to say changing media landscape a million times in this thing, because it changes literally almost every day, I feel like now. But most definitely, no matter what publicist you work with or who you end up working with for your project, they have spent a whole bunch of time creating relationships. And so for sure, they will know who of their relationships are best to tell your story, are best, most likely to have a vested interest in being, involved in this whole journey that you're on as an artist. And for sure, when you're working on a specific project, so for us, if we're doing like really a full album release or announcing something big, we definitely just target and don't blanket pitch. And that's not really something that we would do for a specific, project and campaign. But something like a tour, for example, you're going to be going into markets, especially as an independent artist, someone trying to get some coverage in, smaller markets where you wouldn't necessarily get it unless you were going and playing a show. That is where I think you're not doing so targeted. You're just finding it used to be music writer, but that's like not the case anymore. You're finding the editor or the city editor of, Kamloops, because you're going there to play your first show ever. That is more of where the targeting kind of goes out the window, and the only kind of like targeting you're doing is finding the right people to talk to at the publications in the markets that you're touring in. So, when I talked about those 3 hours of press days I haven't coming up, that's for a tour. First Canadian headlining tour, so that is much less focused on profile building and awareness of the artist, and more profile, awareness of the tour coming up. So that's like as many people who can talk about it, the better, sell tickets, all that kind of stuff. Whereas when we're working on a specified or very, detailed project, that's more of the like targeted pitching that we would do to find like an actual story.
I mean, to me, if I was starting either as a aspiring music journalist or an artist, I would still, to this day, even though there's been a changing media landscape, I would still start with other people who are starting. So I would still go to all the colleges that have like closed or like open circuit radio stations. I would go to the college newspapers if they still exist or online, because that is where I cut my teeth. Like I did a radio show on CIUT, and I was, rock editor of the varsity newspaper, and I would pretty much interview anyone, and that way everyone builds up a portfolio, like start local. And so there's so many colleges, across the country, like and those are the young people that are probably, hopefully going to see artists play. And there's still a connection. If that person meets that artist, they're going to go and they're going to bring their friends, and they're going to, if they enjoy it, like go the following week and the following week. And like, that's what I did.
Mhm.
So that would be my recommendation, instead of being disappointed that you're not getting covered in Rolling Stone and Billboard, or,
Yeah. That's a fantastic point, and one that I kind of want to unpack more, because I want to sort of turn the conversation to those who are doing their own PR and not working with publicists. And actually, I guess to preface that, I'm just going to ask you, Tiffany, at what stage does an artist need a publicist?
I don't know. I feel like my opinion on this question is not a very popular one. But I actually believe that a publisher should be the last person you add to your team, very last, like at the end. Like you have, I know, and I think it's because a lot of people think that, oh, hire PR and then you're going to be everywhere and it's going to be amazing. But truthfully, the thing is as I think we're about to talk about, there are lots of things you can do on your own, lots of research you can do on your own. As Karen just mentioned, college newspapers, college radio stations, all that kind of stuff. And to be totally transparent, PR is expensive. If you want good PR is expensive. And two, in order to do our job well, we need to have some kind of, especially in this world now, we need like streaming stats. We need like so much stuff to break through all of the things that are happening, all of the releases that are going on. We either need a really cool story that we can all work on together to help and create and build, or you need to people actually care now about streaming numbers, followers on Instagram, all that kind of stuff. Those are questions we get on the daily from like blogs blogs, which before would be like, we'll talk to anyone. Now that's how they are deciding, a lot of the time, that's how they're deciding who they're going to talk to. If they have like 6 pitches in front of them, those things do come into consideration. So if you're at a point where you have a lot of, all of these things together, you're going out on tour, like you've kind of built a full team and you're like, okay, now it's time. Or you've built a team that you feel has done as much as you can on your own, then it's time. I would say out of the people we turn away, in the sense of new clients, I would say probably 30% of them are people who we just feel aren't at a point where they need to pay our fee to they're just not at a point where our fee will be given the benefit that they want it to give, you know?
I want to say something to a couple of your comments. Like, yes, it's expensive. And also the results. So let's say you get these results, you get 15 pieces. But what are the results of that? Is that going to translate into sales? Is that going to translate into someone buying a concert ticket, or at the door and going to see you play? Like, that's the important element. It's not like, hey, look at this stack of PR press I got. It's you're trying to get fans, supporters, people that can help you support yourself and have create a living. So like touring, performing, building a fan base, selling merch, getting placements in TV and film, even the Canadian, I shouldn't say even, such as the Canadian, Degrassi uses a lot of independent Canadian artists because they can't necessarily afford to pay for more well-known artists. So, that's a stream of revenue. But another thing you said, a publicist will pitch and pitch and pitch, and you finally write a story, and Billboard doesn't need the artist or the publicist to share the story because they have a lot of eyeballs. But for me owning Samaritan Mag, I need help with that. I need help to grow that. And so often I don't even get a thank you, let alone a share. So it's like I'm the one just sharing it, but to a limited audience, whereas the artist and the publicist isn't sharing it. And that actually sort of annoys me. Um,
Totally.
and I'm
Yeah.
sure with Canadian Musician, like Michael, I don't know if you know that I did probably 15 to 20 big features for Canadian Musician, probably in the first decade or so when I started. Like amazing. Writing for Canadian Musician was one of my favorite to this day assignments, because based on my relationships too, I went in the studio with like Billy Talent and Sam Roberts, and went to Chad's house from Nickelback in BC, his beautiful home and home studio. I got to do a big feature on Alanis. I had interviewed her before, when she was doing pop music. But I remember when Shauna Kennedy was my editor, and we were trying to get her on the cover, and Tom Cochrane ended up being on the cover. But by the time the issue came out, freaking Alanis was massive with Jagged Little Pill. And but like I love doing those stories, like like being in the studio, talking to the producer, watching like the artists create. But it's also, sorry about this, like not a lot of money for a lot of work, and I just wish there was more support for advertising, and instead of labels just like photocopying or sending out the story, they would buy copies and support the publications, and then there wouldn't be a changing media landscape. All these magazines that I loved, these music magazines, would still be around and thriving and paying people properly. And anyway, big sigh.
No, you're absolutely right about all of that. And in terms of, to kind of return to one of the points you were making earlier, Karen, about don't say no to anything, even something little, because I don't know about you. If I get a pitch for an artist that I'm not super familiar with, or isn't big or whatever, but there's something there that piques my interest, I'll go Google. The first thing I'll do is Google them, and I'll see what other media they've done. And the bigger the media outlet, the less likely they are to be the first person that's going to interview you. Media wants to see that someone else cares about you. Journalists want to see that someone else has thought enough to interview you, and that there's interest out there that they can then take and build upon and bring to their audience. And when I go look at what interviews an artist has done before, I'm not looking at, per se, did Rolling Stone talk to them, not to keep bringing up Rolling Stone or whatever, but, I'm not really looking at how big the other media was that interviewed them. I'm looking, were they an interesting interview? Did they say something in there that, again, piques my interest? And maybe it's not really the focus of that interview, but I see they said something there. I'm like, oh, I think there's a story there I'd like to get out of them. I'm just looking at how someone else cared, but more specifically, like, oh, there was something there that I think is interesting that I could build upon for a conversation that suits our audience.
I think if it's, I don't know if you found this, but like there are some lovely artists that I always will want to interview. Sam Roberts, the Billy Talent guys, Nelly Furtado. They're just amazing people. And I'll always want to talk to them. Some have become friends over the years, but if you're one of these like sunglasses, don't really answer, it's like, well, don't waste my time. I don't care enough, like, be nice. It's not a lot to ask.
Yeah. Kind of returning to your point about the talking points and stuff that's like in the pitch email. Like I said, sometimes I may use those, sometimes I may not. A good interviewer may has the confidence and knows when to get away from whatever questions they originally had in mind, because some other topic that's more interesting has come up, and you go down that rabbit hole instead because it presented itself and it was more interesting. But yeah, Tiffany, like, are you looking at too, like, how media snowballs, like whether it's the campus paper, the campus radio station, the blog, the whatever? Do you see that snowball effect that once you get your kind of foot in the door, so to speak, and start doing a few interviews, it starts making it easier for other people to want to do interviews with them?
Yeah, I mean, definitely yes. I think also what it does is it actually helps you get more comfortable. Because the thing about giving a good interview, like I can't tell you, because I sit on every interview that every one of our clients do. And the thing about being able to give a good interview is that you just have to be comfortable. And so those first few ones that you're doing, no matter what, I do public speaking all the time. I think the first time I did it, it's just scary and you're not sure how it's going to go. And even if you have a team who prepares you, you're still not 100% sure how you're going to do. And you're going to be nervous if you're answering the questions right, you know? So the more that you do it too, the more comfortable you get, so that by the time you get to Rolling Stone, Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, you've done 200 interviews and you're ready and you're good and you're prepared. And I think the thing is like when you start with the smaller ones, there are people who, like Karen mentioned, are also starting out. So maybe you're equally as nervous as each other to do an interview. You know, you're like in it together. And then as you grow, you're growing together. And then, you know, another thing that I will say is I think people don't think about enough is when I have some of our like large clients who, you know, have like all the number ones in the US and everything, their favorite interviews to do are ones when they get into an interview and someone has literally looked up their news from like when they were 12 and playing somewhere, like all those old interviews. When someone brings that up, like that's the only time that I will have like an award-winning number one artist say, I want to talk to that person again, because they went back and did all of the research from like literally those tiny papers and tiny interviews that people did when they were coming up, right? So it's just an interesting way to think about, like, you are actually building a foundation for yourself. And like, if you achieve that huge goal that I'm assuming everyone's goal is to, you know, be a very successful artist in your own right, at some point someone's going to go back and it'll be like a walk down memory lane to like to talk about all those things that you talked about, and have a fun conversation about where you are now and how you got to that place. And all of it becomes part of your story, I think. And
I have to say though that I don't like when an artist has gone through media training where they're repeating you know, they've been taught to go, I am thrilled that I worked with, you know, like people don't talk like that. That annoys me, and I try and like get them away from it. But also I never give questions in advance. Publicists still try, which is pretty incredible. I'm actually not even allowed to, and I'm not allowed to, you know, to let someone proofread or look at an article. That's for me, for outlets with integrity. I am aware that artists without integrity, journalistic integrity, will actually let an artist or management or publicist look at a story, or they'll send the questions in advance. But I just always respond and say, it's not going to be anything you can't answer. This is your life, and you're actually in control. I'm not in control. You don't have to answer anything. When a publicist says like, oh, you can't ask someone about such and such, it's like, they're a grown human being. They can say, no, they don't want to answer something, you know, that you're not under oath. You're not in a court. So just let me ask what I want. I'm not one of these people, like, I'm actually amazed sometimes that some outlets, they're still like the at the top of the hierarchy when they'll ask about someone gaining weight or going through a divorce or that type of thing. I don't ask those questions. I don't ask personal questions, unless of course it has to do with the lyric. So yeah, you can always say no. Like, I'm not interested. I'm not comfortable answering that question, or let's move on.
It's interesting, Tiffany. It's good for me to hear you say that artists actually like when you've gone and read and listened to their past interviews, because that's kind of one of my common practices in prep for an interview, was to go read and listen to a number of interviews, but kind of attach it to what you were saying, Karen. Part of what I'm doing when I do that is, I want to have an idea of what their personality is before I talk to them. What sorts of topics seem to energize them and get them talking and opening up? Is there something in past interviews they've said but wasn't unpacked in that interview that I think would be interesting if you got them talking about it? And also, I'm looking for the canned stories that they bring up in every interview and try to steer away from them. Sometimes I'll preface it in a question, be like, Yeah, I know there's this story you always say, and I'll kind of say the abbreviated version of them. What I want to know is that kind of stuff. But yeah, anyways, I'm just going to say that because hearing you say that, I
You
was like,
have
oh,
to
that's
be
great.
careful of pacing, right? Because if
Mhm.
you're only given 20 minutes, you don't want
Yes.
to talk about something. I ran into this issue with Scott Stapp, actually, who I think was having some issues at the time, like new album coming out, and yet he went off on this. If you're not doing it in person, so you don't have that eye contact, like, okay, I want to ask a different question. There's certain people that just talk and talk and talk and will answer like one question and it's 8 minutes later and you can't even use that. And
Mhm.
with him in particular, I ran out of time and I had to actually set up another interview because it was all stuff I couldn't use. You have to be careful about that. Like, how much time do I have? And then sort of pace it. And you can even say to that person, okay, I've only got 5 minutes left. I want to ask you this and this.
And I feel like we could keep talking about our own stories and our own practices back and forth, but I'm seeing we're getting close to Q&A time. So I want to make sure we get in the practical advice about the do's and don'ts for doing your own pitching, your own media outreach, just kind of your own PR strategy for a new and independent artist. So kind of maybe Tiffany, just from you doing this on a mass level, kind of what's the most important advice you have for artists who have a new album coming out, have a tour coming up, whatever it is, but they want to be doing their own media outreach?
Yeah,
What's the basics that you
I
want
think
them to
we've
know?
already talked about it. And truthfully, it's just knowing who you're pitching. Like,
Mhm.
honestly, to get response, it's having a real true understanding of who will relate to the story that you want to tell with your music, right? And that could be simple. That could be like finding the roots writer if you're a roots performer, instead of the R&B writer. Or it could be like, is there someone who always writes about up and coming artists? Or is there someone who only, like, just knowing who you're pitching? Because like you said, Michael, you delete the email if it seems like the person hasn't done the research. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say is, to speak to Karen's comment about liner notes and that kind of stuff, is like having all your assets ready. So,
Mhm.
generally when I'm before an interview, like before my press day this afternoon, everyone wrote and said, can I have an approved press shot? Can I have the album artwork? Can I have, all those things. So making sure that before you're going out to like get a confirmed interview, have all those things. So, and truthfully, I generally send them like when the interview time is confirmed, I'm like, okay, here's everything you're going to need: bio, talking points, approved press photos, liner. Like that's what I send. To just make, truthfully, like, I think overall the PR's job is to make the reporter's life as easy as possible.
Mhm.
So think about all the things that would make their life easy, and then just make sure you have that,
Yeah.
and that you're pitching the right people.
Stories have been killed because there's no photo or there's no good
Yeah.
photo or
Mhm.
there's no horizontal photo.
Yeah.
I also like to fact check. I have major issues with that because sometimes the publicist is like maybe no longer working the project or doesn't have that connection to the right person to fact check something, or they don't answer anymore because they don't really care about the facts. That's like really, another
Yeah.
thing.
I think people,
But
sorry,
I
yeah.
have no problem. Like, I don't care who pitches me. I don't care if it's a publicist. I don't care if it's the artist. Um, and if you are a newcomer and you ask me, I will hop on a call for like 10 minutes if you do have various questions. Like, I do that, not a lot. I get about 200 emails a day of like just a press release. So sometimes I don't know if it really is to me. It might say, hi, Karen, and then it goes into other stuff. But if Tiffany actually phoned and I picked up the phone, and then it's kind of hard to say no, or you just kind of ask more questions, like and then you're like, okay, I'll check, or, oh, that's
Mhm.
interesting, or, but people don't phone anymore,
Yeah.
which is fine. But I'm just saying it does help actually phoning someone.
Yeah. I'll add in my 2 cents there that about photos, that's absolutely right. People artists, everybody, it seems, super underestimates the importance of having high res photos accessible. And you don't need to go pay a fancy photographer. Literally just something that's high res, well lit, has a decent background. Hell, even with new phones, it can be done that way. Just a usable high res photo, have them ready. A link, as music supervisors also always advise, don't put MP3s as attachments, but have a link to somewhere where people can stream your music, whether it's SoundCloud or wherever. Have the 2 or 3 basic paragraphs of information about who you are there in the email, just like you said, Tiffany, kind of have the assets and everything kind of there and accessible and upfront and make the person's life easy. And there was one other point that I swear I was going to make when I was listening to you, Karen, that is completely skipping my mind. But it is 1:45.
Taking personal phone calls, whether you're going to respond to that.
I'm sometimes as nice as you, sometimes not. It depends what day you catch me on. The reality of magazines.
I should add 9 to 5, Monday to Friday.
I was going to say,
I had a call on Christmas Eve once by someone who shall remain nameless. Yeah.
And I'm going to say I never answer my phone if it's not a number I recognize. So I'm
I didn't say I answer, but if I don't recognize it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, something I've heard of artists doing that I'm like, oh, that's great advice in terms of doing your research. Don't just start throwing stuff out there. Oh, here's this person I'm going to send, kind of get your ducks in line and have it ready. I've heard of people creating databases of here's the media outlet, here's the person to contact, here's what they write about or what appeals to them. Kind of do that for 10 or 15 people rather than, again, just collecting 200 emails and sending it all out.
It is hard to assess what someone likes listening to. Like,
I'll say that some of my favorite interviews are with people whose music I'm not personally fond of, and again, it's not to say it's bad music, but like I've had boring interviews with people whose albums I love and fantastic interviews with people whose albums I never listened to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? To me, it's more about the conversation and what are they offering our audience than whether I personally like the music. It's a nice bonus if I like their music and they're also a great person to talk to. Mm-hmm. But I'm more concerned about what insights do they have? How interesting are they? What do they have to offer Canadian musicians audience? What lessons do they have for other musicians that we're talking, who make up our audience? That's what I'm looking for rather than do I personally love their music? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. All right, let's get to questions. So sorry, just give me a minute here to start. Andrew has been sending them along. Thank you, Andrew. So where do I start? All right, from you guys good for questions? Audience questions?
Yeah, yep, yeah.
From Jamie, question for Karen. What if the story is amazing, but the music isn't your cup of tea? It's kind of what I was just talking about. What do you cover, or would you cover them? How?
I mean, that's the thing. Obviously, over the year, I mean, it doesn't have to be my cup of tea. It just has to be good. It just has to be not crap, basically. That's all I can say. There's many artists that I'm not going to like throw on in my car, but doesn't mean it's bad music. It doesn't matter. It's not my job. That's not my job, you know?
And I'll clarify what I said there, which is to say that before the interview and prep for the interview, I'll listen to the album in preparation for the interview. But when I'm saying, an interview with someone whose album I never listened to, that's after the fact, they're not someone who's, up my alley, but I'll listen to the album before doing the interview, of course, but it just means I'm not going to.
That doesn't happen all the time, Michael Raine. So bonus points for you.
All right. The question from Leanne. Do you only take submissions or pitches from publicist PR versus the artist or other? Karen.
I just answered that.
Yeah.
So no.
Same for me.
Pitch me. I don't care.
Yeah. Same for me. I think that's the case for most people. You'll read the pitch from anywhere. I'll say relationships with publicists do help.
Yeah. I was going to say that there's certain publicists that you trust that if they've actually taken you on as a client, there is something there. Because there are some publicists that like, it's more they need the work and the job. So they'll take on not necessarily anyone, but, it might be like the, accordion player that's like, I don't know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Just saying, like, there's a respect thing with certain publicists.
yeah. For some reason, I just thought of a point that I wanted to add in, which is kind of going back to this whole thing being a two-way street. And I'm not sure, this may be something that's more unique to Canadian Musician and just because of what we do. But think about what you can offer. And sometimes that doesn't mean just you being like, hey, interview me. But like more and more, say in Canadian Musician, in every issue Canadian Musician, we have 10 guest columns, either by musicians or industry professionals about all, all kinds of topics. And I've had indie artists pitch me themselves and be like, hey, I'd love to write about this topic for you guys. Like, here's what I've done. Here's how I did it myself. I just organize a cross Canada tour myself. I'd love to write a column about organizing your own cross Canada tour. And that's a fantastic topic for our audience as Canadian Musician. And I'll be like, fantastic. Here's the parameters, like write a column about that. That's great. So, that's one way that they're getting media attention that isn't just, hey, interview me. All right. From Kai, who do you pitch when you have a single and how? Kind of goes back to the research, but do you guys want to kind of take that on?
Well, I mean, for a single, really, you're going after radio, right? Or you're doing a lyric video and you're trying to get eyeballs on the lyric video or a regular video. If you do want to get sort of a spotlight on a single, you have to go to the, maybe like FYI Music News, which I hope you all know about because that's our Canadian trade and you can sign up for their newsletter. But they actually do spotlight singles because it does reach radio stations as well. But, maybe Exclaim. You've got to find the outlets that like cover singles. There's not many, and also for so many reasons, right? Like, are they going to pay someone to write that? No, they're going to get someone to write album reviews probably for like $10 or for free or for $25. Like, so they, probably aren't doing that many. Yeah. And for me, like if there's a charity or a cause, I will cover it if it's good in Samaritan Mag, but that's rare. I don't know how many. I mean, if you have a charity angle, I think, or I hope that a lot of outlets would care a little bit more, but it's also the reason I started Samaritan Mag because my outlets didn't care. So, but yeah, if it's good and it's legit and it's timely, like maybe you want to give, proceeds to the food bank around Christmas time or something. But also when I follow up on that, I don't know if the money really goes there ultimately, like, or if it, it's hard to trace those things.
Yeah, I would say for singles, more often than not now, probably because of everything you guys just talked about in the sense of there's not a lot of people who cover singles. FYI really and truly is the only place that will shine a spotlight on an actual single. And then thinking about that, think of all the people you're competing against, right? Because it's a Canadian music trade publication. So you are going up against the people who are signed to major labels, all that kind of stuff.
Truthfully, what about radio interviews, like on a radio station?
Oh no, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Radio. I would say for almost everyone we work with, we use singles as a way to like build awareness. So generally we don't pitch anything singles. We write a press release and in that press release is included, like we generally don't send it out when the single comes out. It's like the single's been out for a week. It's got 1 million streams. Here we go. Information about the single, but never asking for an interview. I would say that has been one of the largest changes over the last 2.5 years is that at least with our clients, singles are not press drivers. They're not anything like it's not actually to get coverage for. It's more to say like, oh, here's another single. Here's another single. And then, I mean, at the end of a single cycle, generally someone will release an album with a few more songs and it's all those singles plus the 2 new songs or whatever. But I will say that
a single anyway, right? Like a single really means it's an emphasis track being promoted at radio. Back in the day you had a 485, but like you can't just like randomly pick a song and go, that's a single. Like I don't think. I don't know what it encapsulates, but it has to be more than that, you know?
Yeah. And I think interesting also about a single, and this could just be through my client experience, but most of the time now people, you know, when you start as a younger artist, people aren't releasing one song. They're releasing 3 and seeing which one gets traction in streaming, and then use that as a single. Cause then you do have a story about that it was the most popular of whatever, or, you know, you do have actually some data to help you pick what song your audience is reacting to. Whereas before, in the good old days of radio, you'd literally listen to some songs and be like, I think that one will be the one that's going to do something. But now you actually have the tools, even as an independent artist, you have the tools to get it out and see what's actually reacting, like what people are liking of your music. And then, you know, if there's a song that you put out 3 tracks and there's one song that's got so many streams and everyone's posting about it, using it for TikTok and, you know, all those kinds of things, then you're like, oh, maybe this is the song I should put some money behind. Maybe I should get a radio tracker for this song. Maybe I should look at getting, you know, someone to write a press release, not like hire a PR person for 6 months, but like maybe someone should
I
help
do
me do
that.
that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like a single now, I think everyone should look at it as like an actual awareness building tool, not like a press. It's not like a press building tour. It's a tool. It's more like, this is what I sound like. And truthfully, I would never, if you're a younger artist, an up and coming artist, I would never release one single. I would release 2 or 3 at a time and see like what kind of happens, or have a schedule for like a few in a row, like a few weeks in a row, have singles, and then see which ones of those your audience reacts to the most, or which one helps you get more followers or more, you know, monthly listeners on Apple or Spotify or YouTube Music, you know. But yeah, I could talk about singles for a long time. Obviously, you can tell I feel very passionate about said things.
We have a question here from Maxime. I'm just going to say, mention what I was saying earlier about, you know, pitching Canadian Musician on writing columns and that kind of stuff. One of Maxime's artists, Alex Henry Foster, who's also leader of the band Your Favorite Enemies. Alex has become one of my favorites and our regular columnists in Canadian Musician, because he writes these fantastic columns that are insightful, honest, and entertaining about his experiences in the industry and in bands. But anyways, Maxime has a question for Tiffany. You mentioned about a campaign that worked surprisingly well for a debut album. What are you doing when a campaign is not going accordingly to what you expected? Do you have any secret for us to avoid over pitching when you know that you have a story that deserves more attention?
I mean, this is the thing about PR, and Karen alluded to it earlier in this conversation, but the thing about PR is that I can't guarantee you results ever in my life. I can't. I can tell you that as Penelope PR, we've never had a campaign with no coverage. I can tell you that. That is factual in our 11 years. But I cannot guarantee that your campaign won't be the first that happens. So that is the hard part. And then, I mean, I guess the biggest thing I can tell you is like, if you're doing your own pitching, for example, let's take a television show, for example, your local morning show. So if you're from Vancouver, you know, and you really want to get on CTV Morning Live in Vancouver, obviously you've done your research. You've probably found like 4 producers at the show, right? So you've pitched one producer and you haven't heard back. Do not, even though every bone in your body tells you to, do not pitch a second producer, because they all go to the same meetings in the morning. And then if one person comes and is like, I have an amazing idea, and this person is like, me too. And then it's both like, Tiffany thinks she should be on this show, and here's a great story. Like, literally a producer at eTalk told me that and said, after the person did that, I just don't read their emails anymore, because like it made them feel it made them feel stupid in a pitch meeting with their colleagues. So it's like, so our rule of thumb technically is like, we send a pitch and then I actually still call pitch follow-ups. So if someone's really not getting back, I will call. And generally, as Karen said, like maybe they won't answer the phone when I call them, but then they will write back to my email, because they're like, oh, she called me. God, no one calls anymore. But I generally do 2 follow-ups, and then I'm like, if they didn't answer, then their silence is the answer.
I want to add, though, that a lot of the TV stations, radio stations need Canadian content. So if you're strategic and you're nice and you're open, and also if you're portable, you can say, hey, I know I'm up and coming. I know it, no one knows who I am, but if you ever have, like maybe someone's turned away because they're not vaccinated, they can't get across the border, they have a drug charge, they're sick, they're just like, they don't show up, whatever it is, you will fly down, play a song, like you can do that and try and just make it known that, if they have a spot available, like you're free, because who knows, maybe one day they will need, that spot, I'm not talking about like online or print or what I do or what Michael does, but for morning shows and things like that, they need CanCon legally. They need CanCon.
And I'm also going to say, people have, like, we, Canadian Musician, we have the magazine, yes, but we also have the podcast, and often a conversation. I'm having a lot more conversations for the podcast than I am for only 6 issues a year of the magazine. So, I appreciate when people are pitching specifically for the podcast or whatever it is, but just kind of know the full breadth of what a person does, like Karen for Billboard, but also does Samaritan Mag and a lot of other things. There's a question here from Brittany, which I'm actually just going to say, it's more in the line of pitching to music supervisors for getting your songs for placement in TV and movies and that, which is a different ballpark than what we're talking about here. But Brittany, email me, because we've done webinars on that exact topic and had articles in the magazine and all this stuff. It's a popular topic in terms of sync licensing and pitching music supervisors.
I can give a couple of names right now, because I'm sure, don't like bombard them, but I'm sure they have websites where you simply upload, and that probably describes. But Instinct Entertainment does Handmaid's Tale and Degrassi, and they're amazing. And RPix, I believe, is still around, ARPIX. Those are 2. The Canadian music supervisors are kind of easier to come by than trying to find the ones in the US. They're like in their basement, like with no connection to anyone. I guess they don't want to be bothered. But Canadian Music Week has a fantastic, it's amazing, worth the money. They do these round tables with the top music supervisors from all over the world. And you just sit at the table and they will come, and most of them do give out their contact. That's well worth attending.
And Brittany, I'm just putting my email in the chat there. Email me and I'll just send you the link to webinars and articles we've done on how to tailor your pitch to music supervisors and that kind of stuff, because it's a topic that we've covered more than once in a myriad of fashions. Okay, sorry, where was I? I just scrolled away from the questions I was looking at.
I wonder if anyone on here actually wants to be a publicist or wants to be a music journalist.
I do recognize a couple other publicists on here who are working, probably coming to steal your tips, Tiffany. All right, the question.
We're all friends. There's work for all of us.
This is something we've touched on, but I think this is probably a more succinct way of getting at it. But is there a methodology or framework an artist might use to develop their own narrative on their own? So essentially, when we were talking about what's the story behind the music, what's some kind of tips on how to start thinking in the right way to identify what your own story is?
A bio for someone, and oftentimes when they're new, they're like, oh, I don't have a story. I'm like, okay, let me worry about that. And as I'm interviewing them, I might discover they came, as immigrants to Toronto, and, I don't know, whatever their story is. Everyone has a story. Everyone has an incredible story. So have someone, one of your friends, interview you and record it on your phone, asking you about like your background, your musical background, your upbringing, inspiration for certain lyrics, and something will come out of that, and then that's your bio. So the crux of that, the angle of that, that's sort of your story.
Perfect. Important question from Anna. How would you pitch as a trans artist with a really good story, releasing their first album so as to get past the systemic bias? Who would you pitch to? I seem to be running up against a lot of anti-LGBT attitudes.
I mean, I personally, I I think there's a lot of people like open to your story.
Yeah. Right now more than ever.
Because it's very important for us to hear from you and hear your story. It's unfortunate if you are running into roadblocks with that, but then you don't want to talk to those people anyway. There's honestly like so many other people that will, provided your music is really good. So, you know, yeah, that's, I mean, just keep going and keep pitching this, you know, other outlets and more outlets. Or actually, you know what, I actually advise you perhaps to reach out to some other trans performers and see if they have advice too. Lucas, who fronted the Clicks, who is an absolutely extraordinary talent, I'm sure would be very open to speaking with you. Silvera, I don't know if I'm actually pronouncing his last name right, but yeah, I would do that perhaps and get advice from others.
Yeah, and
yeah, and I think there are people. This question was from Anna, right? Yeah, Anna, I'll send. I know Michael put his email address in here, and I can. If you want to email him, he can forward it along to me. Just we just finished a campaign with a Two-Spirit Indigenous artist, and you know, there are places for it. It's and there are people who are so accepting. So I am really actually apologizing on behalf of our industry, because it's, I mean, the thing is like we are in a time of growth and learning and understanding, and I think unfortunately it's just going slower than we would like it to. So, but I just want you to know that there are people out there who are interested in your story and want to tell it. Unfortunately, you just haven't been able to find them yet. And if anything, I would say, you know, there are publications focused for the LGBTQ2S+ community. So I would say truthfully start there. And so you can start to feel confident in your story and your understanding of yourself and what you're comfortable talking about. And then from there, you know, it will just continue to grow, I think.
And email me, put in the subject line, like connect me with Tiffany or something, or webinar and connect me with Tiffany or something like that. So I can just identify it easily in the email and I'll connect you to.
I just want to ask you something, Michael, about Canadian Musician, because traditionally, obviously, you have covered a lot of like white male rockers, right? How has that changed for you? Like, I know you cover a lot of females as well, but you know, Black artists, Indigenous artists, like, did you make a conscious shift in the past like few years?
Yeah, big time. For sure. A Canadian Musician, you know, if I'm just going to be frank about it, like over the years, it was like, because the magazine's been around since 1979, and I've been here 9 years, though I only took over as the head editor a year ago. But I think you can see shifts along the way, whether it's getting less male or less rock centric, less straight, less white.
And to your subscribers that love Tom Cochrane and Nickelback, like, send you messages like, what are you doing, I don't care about this? Or are they not make it more interesting for them? Like,
you see more of that on social media, less about direct emails from subscribers. You know, sometimes it's like, all right, you know, for example, it's the last two covers were like Ruth B, and Ruth B is less out of our wheelhouse, but say like the last one was Cardinal Official, who had just been wanting to talk to for a really long time, just because of like being the pioneering rap star and now pioneering label executive and A&R executive. Just knowing he's a super interesting guy with a ton of insight and is really engaging to talk to, and he's just someone that I'd long had in mind as someone that, once I had the power to do so, would want to talk to and put on the cover and do a long story about. And you know, he lived up to that. As I found one of the best conversations I've had in a long time. But you know, and for me, it's less about white or straight in that and more about genre, because frankly, you know, yeah, our wheelhouse as a magazine for decades was rock and to an extent country, but you know, guitar music effectively.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a conscious effort that, you know, I've made and Andrew King made in the last few years. He was here to expand that and get away from, but you don't want to abandon it at the same time. You still got to kind of service your audience, but you also want to challenge your audience. So there is that balance you're trying to find between challenging them, but also not alienating them. But for me, it's often been about, there's definitely been a conscious effort to, get less white, straight male. But for me, I think the bigger challenge for our audience is about genre and challenging them with stuff that's in the areas of R&B and hip hop and, more in music production, that kind of stuff.
Stories can still resonate because obviously you're not a radio station, so they're not hearing the music if they want to seek it out after. So when you mention Cardi, like, yeah, he's got an incredible story and he's built an incredible career and he's extremely well respected and knowledgeable in the creative and the business side. So that can offer something to anyone of any genre, right?
Yeah, exactly. My feeling has always been like, is it an interesting story? That's all I really care about is an interesting story. Because I know for myself as a reader, as a longtime Rolling Stone subscriber, and often, one thing I found, as much shit as Rolling Stone has takes over the years for who they put on the cover, I've often found that I really enjoyed stories about artists who I wasn't particularly a fan of, just because it was a well done, journalistic, well written story.
Yeah.
And as a music fan, I often found it more interesting to write about those artists who I wasn't a fan of, partly because I probably read less about them. But for me, it's just like, a good story is a good story. A good article is a good article. A good interview is a good interview. And it's less about, I don't want to say it's less about the music, but, I think people can appreciate stuff about people that they're not necessarily going and listening to. Sorry, where were we? Oh, we're going over time, so I'll just try to pull out a couple last questions here. My apologies. I've totally disorganized myself here in terms of the questions Andrew is passing along. Here's one from Mary. For artists that are finally able to tour albums released in 2020, what is the likelihood of getting press without release of new music?
Ugh, I mean,
tough in this situation. Yeah.
0. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. But in my business partner, I call it the pandemic record. Like, it was something that you put out, and we're like almost all of our clients are put out a record and will never tour it. Like, it's a thing that someone listened to over the last 18 months. And sure, back to singles, but sure, there were a few songs that probably hit and were fan favorites and will be leveraged in whatever tours are coming up later this year or in 2022. But from a media, like, I know pitching, like, we wouldn't take on a client who put out a record in 2020 and wanted to press on said record in 2021, 2022. Like, we wouldn't pitch that.
Okay. Perfect. I'm sorry for anyone's questions we haven't got to. We've gone overtime, and I just saw, sorry, Tiffany, I just saw your note that you got to run because we've made you late for a meeting.
That's okay.
I don't mind if people want to email me. Just don't bombard me. If you have a question, you're welcome to email me. Should I say my email on this thing?
Yeah.
I'm actually very easy to find. I really am. So maybe I'll make you do some homework to find me.
Yeah, I'm easy to find. Woo! My computer. I'm easy to find as well. But I will preface by saying I'm 32 days away from an award show, so my response time is not the same as usual.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. Look it up. We were talking about research. Maybe that's your assignment, is go find their emails. But Tiffany, I already put my email in there, so I'm probably bound to get bombarded. But Tiffany, sorry, I'll let you run. Thank you so much for doing this. And
thank you, everyone. It was awesome.
And Karen, likewise, thank you so much for doing this. I've really enjoyed it, and hope you guys found it valuable, everyone watching.